Good morning to everyone and welcome to this webinar. The purpose of the webinar today is to look at the work done late last year and this year on projects to facilitate environmentally sound ship dismantling. To give you an idea of what we'll cover in the webinar, I will start with a brief introduction on the origins of the project. I will then pass to our consultant, Mr. Roy Watkinson, who will then go through the case study that was undertaken and the guidance and training materials developed to supplement the case study. Next, I will come back and give an overview of our upcoming capacity building projects. And finally, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. It's anticipated our presentation will take about 30 minutes to allow plenty of time for questions. Right, just to give some idea of the origins of the project, this project falls under what is known as the Global Program for Sustainable Ship Recycling, which was developed by the Secretariat of the Basel Convention in 2007. Now, this was done to encourage collaboration between key stakeholders involved in ship dismantling, or otherwise known as recycling, to facilitate improvements in worker health and safety and environmental conditions in the ship recycling industry globally. Initially, the global program, which was launched in Bangladesh in early 2008, simply facilitated an exchange of views of key stakeholders. However, shortly after its launch, it was endorsed by or given support by the Conference of the Parties to the Basel Convention and the Joint Working Group of the ILO, IMO, and Basel Convention on Ship Scrapping. Since this time, a variety of capacity building activities have been or are under development, and I should specify that this is done at parties' request. Now, the origins of the project we're to talk about today can be found in a workshop that was held in Izmir, Turkey in 2010. This was a ship recycling technology and knowledge transfer workshop, which was held at the request of the Pakistani government. They requested technical assistance in relation to ship recycling matters. Graciously, the Turkish Ship Recyclers Association and government hosted the workshop in Izmir, at which time there was an exchange of knowledge, ideas, and practices between both the Turkish ship recycling industry and government and their Pakistani counterparts. One of the recommendations coming out of the workshop was that we needed to develop guidance to help countries and yards work towards compliance with both the Basel and Hong Kong conventions, particularly where they might overlap and support each other. And another question was, well, what will a compliant yard look like in the future in terms of both Basel and Hong Kong requirements? So from this workshop, the Secretariat developed a project concept for the case study we're here to talk about, and then applied for a grant through the European Commission and also received co-funding through the government of Norway. Just briefly to look at the objectives of the case study, our consultant Roy will go through these in more detail. Firstly, the first objective is to develop these operationally compliant ship recycling facility models in consideration of both the Basel and Hong Kong conventions and their guidance. Secondly, this should include consideration of operational, procedural, and infrastructural requirements, and importantly also look at downstream from the ship recycling facility. Next, the consultant was required to develop a stepwise approach to achieve compliance in the short, medium, and longer terms. So those who are familiar with the Basel Convention technical guidelines on ship dismantling will be aware that this is a similar approach as adopted in the technical guidelines. there we go. The key outputs will be 2 sets of guidance and train the trainer materials for use at the ship recycling facilities themselves and also by the competent authorities. And these will be replicable for use in all ship recycling countries. To facilitate this, we will be translating them into languages. But it should be noted that as beaching is the predominant method of ship recycling today, or especially when the project commenced, that will be the focus of this study. Now I'm going to hand over to Roy Watkinson, our consultant who has undertaken this work on behalf of the Secretariat. He'll provide some more information on the project, the methodology employed, and the outcomes. So Roy, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Susan, and good morning to all, or good afternoon, or good evening, where you are. And thank you very much for that introduction. I hope everybody can hear me, so that we're all ready to go. The first slide of my part of the presentation is just to give you a general overview of the work that has been carried out today. Which I will go through, and you'll see from the agenda that I've been given 30 minutes. I'll try to make it a little bit less than that because I hope I don't send people to sleep through taking so long. So we're going to give you some information according to the terms of reference that Susan just described on the case study, some of the background to that has been set out, the field work, the findings of that field work, and then look at some of the outputs, which are the model compliant process, the example approach, and the guidance, and lastly training of training materials. Okay, so we'll go straight into the preparatory field work. Just to give you an overview of that, the idea was that there would be a mission to investigate current practices in ship recycling facilities. That would be to Turkey, undertaken by a group of us, also to Pakistan with a local Pakistan-based consultant, and then other work that was undertaken through attendance of various meetings with respect to ship dismantling. The fieldwork in Pakistan was based upon questionnaires and interview with various government ministries and the regulatory authorities involved, as well as those dealing with ship recycling and waste management facilities, to investigate current levels of compliance and look at the particularly downstream waste management practices and its regulation. The outputs, as I mentioned, were to provide reports on the baseline conditions found from the questionnaire results, the downstream waste management treatment capacity with respect to Pakistan, looking at the actual capacity, potential capacity, and the option for environmentally sound, cost-effective technologies, and then to develop from that a case study which would be subject to road testing with the materials that were produced. The materials that were produced would involve, as Susan's mentioned, the compliant model, particularly with respect to environmentally sound management of hazardous materials. So that would involve things like identification, removal, handling, storage, and preparation, all of which were to be recognized in the guidance for dealing with environmentally sound management. The appropriate waste management channels, particularly for those that, for instance, are given in the inventory of hazardous materials for the Hong Kong Convention, would be identified, so that we could then work out length of the Hong Kong Convention. I don't know if I you may hear interference yourself. If there's somebody who can mute their microphone to appreciate it. Others can hear. Right, I'll go on now to look at some of the findings, and obviously this is an overview of the work that we've done. Initially, for the background, for those who may not be familiar with it, with ship recycling in Turkey, it's carried out in one spot at Aliaga in the Aegean coast, and there are about 20 facilities. 14 of those have got certification relating to environmental management systems, health and safety, and quality management systems. The latest information that we received was that they process around 300 ships per annum in total, which amounts to 650,000 light displacement tons as a whole. Of interest for this particular study is that they operate a combination of what is described as landing, in other words, certainly generally the bow portion of the ship is beached, and a float method, or you might call that alongside, and then the ship is gradually hauled up and dismantled. Also of interest is, and you can see from the little picture there, I hope, that the facilities now are pretty much substantially laid to hard standing, which is concrete. Some of this was actually being undertaken on some yards while we were there, and it involves both the roads and the cutting areas. Another feature of interest to Turkey is that they combined themselves into a ship recyclers association, which is more than representative because it operates a waste management centre and provides facilities such as specialist training and the capacity to deal with removal of asbestos, and a physical centre that has storage for liquids, for example, and for other wastes, as well as a health centre for testing and treatment. Hazardous waste generally goes off-site to either, depending on the type, to specialist incineration, hazardous waste landfill, or is used for energy recovery if it's fuels such as oil and so on. In terms of compliance, the situation at Turkey is probably not dissimilar to that in many other countries where ship recycling is carried out, in that there is a number of ministries involved, which flows down to the competent authorities that are dealing with ship recycling, which means that there's a wide legal framework, and I'll show some of this in a couple of slides that come from Turkey in a moment. Turkey applies the Basel Convention controls on hazardous waste input, which means that, of course, that there's prior informed consent, and this is backed up by regulatory inspections, and occasional enforcement action is taken where breaches are discovered, as we were informed. Now, I think the best way to show some of what they've done is I'll skip through a number of slides that the representatives of the ministries showed us, and I think it gives you an illustration of the kind of work that they've been doing to develop their own compliance processes. This just shows you the legal framework. I don't think we need to look at it in detail, but you can see that there is a pretty comprehensive set of controls for defined waste. They've got a national waste management plan, which currently through their 5-year program of 2009 to 2013, determining their strategic targets and the ways in which they intend to carry out their overall waste management strategies. They focus very much on environmentally sound management in practice, providing for the Basel Convention implementation, creating environmental criteria that identify expected level of environmental protection, and look at matters such as the technical standards and monitoring and inspection. It's the only area that's of interest for this particular study that is currently available for ship recycling in Turkey. Ship Recyclers Association mentioned plays a significant practical role in treatment of waste and also dealing with matters such as training and so on. Here's some examples of the hard standing and pollution prevention. You'll see the top left-hand picture there has some drainage to intercept any polluting materials that may be running back down from cutting and other activities. There's a wide range of documentary control that's also necessary in order to demonstrate that everything is being properly done in accordance with the relevant regulations. On the marine side, there's potential to protect against oil pollution by deploying booms. These are actually available at the Waste Management Centre. Turkey also has developed policy for vessels, and that involves Basel Convention and IMO guidelines. And their summary, their words, not mine, is for environmentally sound management of ship recycling and its waste management. The technology needs to be appropriate. You need good quality data and effective communication, as well as sharing of best practice information. All good points. Just an overview shot of the hazardous waste landfill that is used amongst other facilities, such as incineration that they have for dealing with the waste arising downstream. Not dedicated solely to ship recycling, of course, but it's for general use. A quick look at the field work that was undertaken in Pakistan. Baseline report was produced that described the conditions. It's the beaching method, as we already know. A larger number of plots, around 4 acres each, about a third of which have been developed. There was a previous report that was carried out for the World Bank, and the results of that indicated that asbestos is going to be a significant long-term problem. Polychlorinated biphenyls still expected to be involved, being produced from older vessels and naval vessels, particularly cables. In Pakistan, no collection or management options for ozone-depleting substances were available at the time of the study, and other pollutants such as metals in paint and large volumes of oily water needed to be managed. The assessment of that report was that Pakistan may accumulate some significant quantities of asbestos, PCB, and ODS over the next 20 years, assuming the business as usual case where ship recycling continues to be undertaken. And this report concluded that there was basically a simple control mechanism for ship recycling, which do not yet meet the international norms under the Hong Kong Convention, and therefore extensive institutional capacity building, infrastructure upgrading was going to be needed to meet those standards, which is coming to the point of this particular study. There were recommendations, and the objectives of these recommendations were to deal with the risks, to provide safe storage and transport and options for financing, as well as for cleaning ships prior to starting any breaking or recycling activity. And the recommendations amounted to these: improvement in enforcement, a proposed strategy including institutional capacity building, institutional technical capacity building, and significant investment in hazardous waste management to achieve Hong Kong Convention compliance and, of course, Basel Convention compliance according to their guidelines. Interventions on hazardous waste management and disposal could also be seen to be an opportunity for levering in investment through public-private partnerships in Pakistan. There are known to be some larger companies with hazardous waste treatment facilities, and maybe extension of those would be helpful. On to some work that was undertaken to update and provide some further understanding from the point of view of this study. As I mentioned, the local consultant provided questionnaires and looked into the institutional arrangements and the facilities available, particularly for downstream waste treatment in Pakistan. Two features I think that we can see were in common with those for comparison that we found from Turkey were that the institutional arrangements are spread across several ministries, which is, as I said, typical, and that the facilities, again, are located in one geographic area, which makes it perhaps better to be able to deal with. Still, downstream facilities for hazardous waste management are lacking, especially for asbestos, PCB, and ozone-depleting substances, and that the ship recycling conditions and the conclusions really largely unchanged since the World Bank study. That led this study to make some broad recommendations for actions at the recycling yards, particularly in the context of developing the infrastructure which would be common to any set of facilities that employ the beaching method. And typically this would involve containment, improvement in containment to prevent pollution, better use of fixed plants, that means things like generators and plants like that, improvements to waste and material storage, and of course mobile plants, which I'll show some examples in a moment. Also, identify the need to develop some management procedures, and of course the development and implementation of training programs, part of the output of the study. Downstream waste management in particular was something that needed further investigation. No full waste survey of all the arisings of other waste and hazardous material has yet been conducted, and therefore in order to size and develop facilities one needs to do this. That would then lead on to establishment of the appropriate facilities for dealing with the materials that we've been talking about. In terms of competent authorities, there's a kind of parallel approach in the same way that a waste survey is needed, a survey of the particular needs for manpower and skills, particularly by the local competent authorities in Balochistan, which would then require a training and capacity building program. And at that point is when development of inspections for monitoring and compliance, which you might say in the same way that Turkey is carried out, is then needed. The compliant models that was referred to earlier then in the introduction then would be based upon the Hong Kong and Basel Conventions. The report itself discusses some variants of these, but the main plank fairly obviously will be to develop environmentally sound management at the yards using the Hong Kong and Basel Convention and their guidelines, particularly in order to ensure that there was the continuity between the environmentally sound operation at the yards as well as downstream at the waste treatment facilities as they are developed, which has to be backed up by monitoring programs. I've mentioned at this point that the study has not majored on the issue of occupational health and safety. There's much that's been done elsewhere by the International Labour Organization and in cooperation with others. This study recognises that and the fact that there is a linkage between the two, although it doesn't major on it. In order to establish for any particular set of recycling facilities, therefore some criteria were developed. This is presented as an example here for the implementation of the environmental requirements in the form of questions, and with a table on the right-hand side showing the columns to indicate what level is actually being achieved to date. And therefore, a user of this table will be able to have a ready reckoner, if you will, of the current status of compliance. And a number of these tables will be in the final report. This will be followed up, as Susan said at the outset, by a number of actions to be taken, drawn from the existing guidelines, but intended to make sure that they are both achievable and progressive. So you'll see that because the Basel Convention guidelines, for example, have now been in operation or available for use for nearly 10 years, that the timescale over which development can be carried out is reduced somewhat compared to the Basel Convention guidelines. The idea is, here's the example of one taking. Hello? Yeah, thanks. For the ship, first of all, dealing with where this has not yet been applied for minimal equipment and cost, and then also taking into account the priorities for health and safety as well as environmental protection, so that those techniques under the first column, under A, ship on the left-hand side, you'll see testing for presence of toxins, irritants and flammable gases before entrance into confined spaces. it's something that is intended to be done early on, with in the medium term, the second column, 1 to 3 years, the simpler but low-cost techniques involving more testing, spill containment, and dealing with the removal of hazardous materials can be undertaken. Say a little bit now about the other products from this, the guidance and training materials, which are currently being finalized. The two sets, as were mentioned at the outset, for managers and supervisors at ship recycling facilities and competent authorities for regulating the industry. And the intention is that these are replicable for use in all ship recycling countries, given that the four parameters for this were for those employing the beaching method. Two sets of guidelines, in essence, will cover these areas. For managers and supervisors, there'll be a description of what constitutes environmentally sound management at the facility level, the steps to be taken at ship recycling facilities so that environmentally sound management operations downstream can be facilitated, and I'll describe a little bit about that with an example in a moment. Operational procedural steps are required for ensuring compliance with Basel and Hong Kong conventions over time, obviously, and the roles and respective competencies of management and staff. The competent authorities, slightly different but also slightly similar, because in order to regulate, the competent authority will need to understand in much the same way how facilities are operated and what the criteria and standards are. So again, what constitutes environmentally sound management at the facility level is just as important. Their own processes for ensuring compliance, which involves a number of steps depending upon the legislation, regulatory requirements, the powers that they have, and so on, at the ship recycling facility and at the downstream waste management facilities. And again, as with the ship recycling facility themselves, what are the key roles and respective competencies of management and staff in meeting the obligations? The train-the-trainer materials then are comprising direct instruction and training materials, therefore fewer words and more pictures, in fact, to assist in those who are teaching the operators and the regulators. Just for example, maybe some illustrative pictures in there. This one is actually of a ship that was being dismantled on a UK beach in 2008. It did end up there as a result of an incident rather than being deliberately beached. But the key thing is to note that it is on the sand, and though it's a low ground bearing capacity vehicle with large tyres, it is able to operate in those conditions. So it is possible to use mechanical equipment in these circumstances. Other examples are the orderly management, in this case, of materials for recycling, but can equally well be applied to materials for treatment as waste. And some simple diagrams which will show you a yes and a no way of doing things. In this case, it is avoiding mixing wastes which may be incompatible may cause hazardous reactions and may also make downstream treatment more difficult or more expensive. Similarly, as mentioned just now, storage of these materials is something that, done properly in bays, is much more efficient and more effective rather than randomly spreading around. And although this looks fairly simple, it's an inspector on the site and it's with the competent authorities. You can see from looking at that, for example, the inspector is wearing some personal protective equipment. He has his inspection checklist and so on. Features that would not be surprising to anybody involved in regulatory compliance, but it is to demonstrate that there is a process and there's a system that is employed when carrying out this kind of operation. Well, that's all I have to say about the work that's been done and the products. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening and pass back the control, or ask Susan and the operators of this to take back control so that we can continue with the rest of the webinar. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Roy. Would you mind, oh, he has muted himself. Right, so I would like to now just quickly introduce two of the upcoming capacity building projects that the Secretariat will be undertaking till the end of 2013. The first is a feasibility study to identify cost-effective, environmentally sound alternatives to the beaching method. Now, this study has just commenced. I see that our consultant, or one of our consultants who is doing the work, Mr. Sven Overgaard, is on the call, which is very useful. As the slide suggests, we'll be looking at alternatives to the beaching method and looking at potentially interested parties and industry partners and sites that may be interested in the establishment of these facilities. And this is all made possible by a grant from the European Union. Next, as Roy mentioned, one of the big issues certainly in Pakistan, and if I may also extend that to Bangladesh, is a lack of downstream waste management capacity. Now, a very big project that will be undertaken by the Secretariat, the preparations are beginning now, is to develop inventories of hazardous waste in the ship recycling areas in Bangladesh and Pakistan. This will take into account both ship recycling and other industrial activities, and from there to develop business cases to enhance downstream capacity. So to look at potential partnerships, loans, investments that may be made to actually facilitate the development of this infrastructure. It should be noted that in Bangladesh, this project will be undertaken as part of a IMO NORAD, or the Norwegian Agency for Development Cooperation, as part of their wider project to improve conditions in the ship recycling industry in Bangladesh. Right. So that concludes our presentation. I should say just quickly that the case study guidance and training materials that Roy went through during his presentation will be available on the Basel Convention website by the end of November, and they will be available in languages in the early part of next year. So I'll now hand back to our host. Thank you.